consequences, and the ones that go the most awry go out of business. There's where the Federal Reserve comes in.
Right.
That's when you bring in the state and force all banks to be under the state's umbrella through this Federal Reserve system they created, which
Right.
is not a government institution. It's a cartel of private bankers.
Correct.
And back it with the force of government. And so only no bank goes under because it's socialized into the entire system. Banks do go under, but only when the Federal Reserve puts the finger on them
Right.
and says, "You guys have been a little bit too bad. Get out of our cartel."
Right. And the alternative is not to fractional reserve banking would be full reserve banking, and that also works and has a much stronger free market kind of rationale. Because then the problem with what we think of as banking and the fractional reserve banking is that all that money that depositors put in there is demand deposits. They can walk up to the door anytime they want and get their money out. And if the banker doesn't have it, the vault cash, and he can't get it real quick, he starts looking very bad indeed, and
Sure.
somebody closes him down, or he's simply closed down by the mob or something.
And that's where the government comes in with this Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC,
Right.
which then tells you that your deposits are insured by this entity for, I believe it's $200,000 now. They just
250,
recently
yeah.
raised it. And people go, "Oh, well, all right, then if this bank should go wild, then and they go out of business, the government will bail me out anyway."
So I don't have to worry about the bank.
The government doesn't have that money.
Right.
That money will just simply be printed
Right.
to
It will
give
be,
to you.
Created out of a computer bank.
Out of
And we'll
thin
get
air.
into that in a long minute here.
Yeah.
But full reserve banking is where you try to match the loan with the duration at which the deposit is in there. And so if you've got a series of, let's say, mortgages out there on houses, 20-year mortgages, and everybody knows that on the average these mortgages get paid off in 7 years, then you would have to have a comparable amount of money deposited in certificates that come due in 7 years.
But even at that, you can't call that full reserve banking.
No,
Because
it's not, but it's supposedly.
my money that I've
Right.
put with your institution is loaned out to Joe, who
Right.
may or may not pay that money back, and I
Right.
could lose.
Right, but
And it's not
given that
available
the-
for me at any time.
Right, but you have understood that you have to put your money in there.
Then I would be, you're talking like where I might sign
Yes.
a certificate of deposit
Right.
saying that,
Yes,
for 7 years you can use this money.
right, you can't get it back.
And I always think of that, again, I still think of that as some kind of an investment consortium more than banking, really, in a true free market. What's different in that than you, Irwin, setting up an investment group, and I, Dave, coming over to your house and saying, "Okay, here, take 1,000 of my money and invest it in this,
Right.
and pay it back to me in 10 years. That's our contract." That's no different.
Right, but here in the last 5 years, the ordinary bank has taken all of those mortgages and lumped them together and sold them to investors. They've securitized all of those loans and immediately get back what? Cash, which they can then loan out,
Sure.
which in some respects vastly increase the money supply, the liquidity, the M1, if you want to call it that.
Sure.
Is that what happened?
Again, this is where it gets really confusing for most people because you wonder, how do all of these derivatives work, these short sells, all of this, and what you have is when money doesn't have any real value other than ones and zeros in a computer database,
Yes.
okay, paper financiers become pretty ingenious at building pyramid schemes on that money.
Correct.
And the federal government government itself, in general, is nothing more than a pyramid scheme.
Yes, but then the problem was also that the securities weren't properly labeled as, they were all AAA,
Yeah.
when they really were kind of B minus.
Those are just,
triple B
you know,
minus.
those are the Wall Street buddies participating with each other.
Okay.
You scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I'll
Right.
give you this rating.
Right,
We
and
all
I'll
make
go
our
through
money.
government and my
Yeah.
time comes.
And when this all comes crashing down and our scheme falls apart, the government will just print up a bunch more and bail us all out
Okay.
on people's backs.
So we're getting somewhat deeper into our understanding of banking. So we've got banks that were private banks that took in gold, made paper out of it, the paper started trading. And there's another variant of that is when governments, I think the British government, sometime in the late 1700s, went out and borrowed money.
Sure.
And they
All
had
states borrow money.
and they gave these people bonds.
Right.
And those bonds started trading. And this is sometimes cited as the beginning of capitalism. And that's why it started in England, is because there was suddenly a big burst of liquidity where people could suddenly finance all sorts of things, and big bucks could, accumulate more than what was the gold that was around at that time.
That might be defined as the beginning of capitalism by a Marxist or such. That had nothing to do with capitalism. When the state is creating debt and creating money, that has nothing to do with capitalism.
Correct.
What we have here in this country today is nothing to do with capitalism. This is a system of fascism. Capitalism is back where you and I started. People free to produce what they want, use their labor, their property, their time how they wish, and exchange with other free people in whatever medium of exchange they choose. That's capitalism.
Excellent. Okay, so this is at least one strata. So we've got a capitalist system where it's free trade, but then you start getting more and more complications. But it seems that as there's more money available, more liquidity, more stuff starts happening. And examples are when they printed greenbacks in 1862,
Stuff like wars start happening, right?
63, 64. And then they started calling these, well, they had good 60s, but in 1872 they started pulling in the greenbacks, started pulling them off the market. And they had a terrible 1870s period because there was simply no liquidity. Here in Michigan, there's a book in my library called The History of Grand Rapids, 1890. Wonderful book, gold. It's got a gold leaf on it. That's kind of a cute little thing. Cost $10 at the time. And in there it talks about the first bank, or maybe it was the second bank of the United States. Andrew Jackson refused to renew this thing, and so there was a
Right.
contraction.
Yes.
And then here in Michigan, the real disaster was that they had state sponsored banks. So that the state is allowed to mint currency, and they farmed this out, I think, to the various banks. But the bank had to show that they had gold in their vault. And the book actually details how the state's inspector came down the Grand River, and there were 20 little villages all along the way, and every one of them had a bank. And so he would go to bank, high up in the Grand River somewhere, and say, "Show me your gold," and they would open up the vault, and he would look in and he'd say, "Yep, you're doing fine. Close it." And they would take the gold real quick and ship it down to the bank right down the river from them, and they went all the way down the Grand River. I mean, he says this. I'm not sure.